Thank you for being here this morning. And my question really does piggyback on Senator Tester's and your conversation around technology, where we are, what kind of technology are we using today, what kind of technology are we going to, and how will that technology open the door for the private sector to become, the private insurers to become more involved in it. Because as I look at the state of South Carolina, we are in desperate need of remapping, and you're going through that process, which of course causes consternation and challenges as well. Communities like Beaufort County, where Hilton Head is, most of us know where that is, hasn't been remapped in about 20 years, which is consistent, I think, throughout the state. The 1,000-year flood that we had in 2015, and I will say that FEMA did a pretty darn good job, so thank you for your participation and your assistance during that challenging storm. The reality, however, is that most of us would assume that in South Carolina, the coastal exposures received a lot of the pain and suffering, when in fact, as you know, the inland communities, where there's Florence and Columbia, because of the dams that were broken and other situations, challenged folks who never heard the words flood insurance from their agent, because there was never a thought that it would be needed. I think about the same situation in Louisiana and around the country, where the flood impact is now in areas that are likely not mapped for it, perhaps impossible to do so. But if we're going to have more private insurers coming into the market, hopefully to help reinforce the market, and we're going to have better predictions on where the possibility of the impact will be, the last few storms suggest that we have some ways to go, or perhaps it's just not possible at this point to get there.
So there are maps under development. And so in the case of South Carolina, we pass 100% of those funds directly to the state through a cooperating technical partnership, and they provide the leadership on the ground for this. So even in Beaufort County, those maps are in draft and working with the community, but they are not yet in effect. Let me talk about the inland piece, and let me go to technology. From an inland perspective, you're absolutely right. It's interesting. I talk to folks on the coast. They go, "Wow, we survived this." I'm like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa! What you survived is not what the communities in Florence and Columbia and others did." From an insurance perspective, it did go well beyond the high hazard area that was mapped. But I would tell you, we had an insurance problem inside the high risk area. Way too little participation and penetration. And particularly in the neighborhoods that I was in, I know that you traveled through that area as well, a lot of these were renters. So they were landlord owned. And so I look at the renter side of the equation. Only 1% of my book is sold to renters. And how do we help them understand that for $100 or $150, they could have an amazing amount of coverage so that they could rebuild their lives? To a technology point. When you do a map, you got to have a ground elevation, you got to know how much water is going to come and how deep it's going to be, and then finally, how does it interact with the built environment? We have to have good, solid ground elevation data. We do that with LiDAR technology. Frankly, we need that across the country, and right now we buy that in piecemeal. But if we had that combined with where the structure locations are, and we're making progress there, but not fast enough across the country, I think technology takes a much larger bump. At that point, we could literally have people with their smartphones showing us pictures of where their base floor is. We could write it in a much simpler way. I do agree with Mr. Menendez. We need to have a simpler product than we have today. It is far too complex, and technology helps us get there. But technology even helps meet the point of the claim. High-end claims still need an adjuster on the ground, but if I'm looking at a wet carpet-style claim for $10,000 to $15,000, some pictures taken on an app on your phone is absolutely sufficient for us to be able to move.
Having sold flood insurance for a while, I thank God that I no longer sell it, but it was an important part of what we did for a living and trying to find a way to mitigate the concerns of the average person, the average place in the country, specifically in South Carolina, is a troubling task for the private sector. Socioeconomic impact. A lot of folks think about Hilton Head, Kiowa, many of the coastal exposures, and think about the colossal palaces built on the coast. The reality of it is that there are a number of heirs property where you have small structures with folks who simply cannot afford. Since Tester's left, I'm going to reclaim my 21 seconds. Cannot afford any real increases in flood insurance. Is there a method to measure and or compensate for the socioeconomic areas or no?
So today, under the Act, I don't have any authority to look at socioeconomic impacts. As we look at the affordability study that I was asked about a bit earlier, we're looking at these dimensions. We'll be able to bring more information forward to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator